The restaurant was not fancy, but it stayed busy almost every evening. It sat near a main road where office workers stopped after long days and travelers came in for quick meals. The lights were warm, the chairs were old but clean, and the smell of cooked food filled the air. It was the kind of place where people came to eat and leave, not to notice the lives of those who served them. The waitress had been working there for years. She arrived early every morning and often stayed late into the night. Her uniform was always neat, even though it had been washed too many times. She moved quickly between tables, carrying plates, refilling glasses, and offering polite smiles that most people barely noticed. Her life was simple but not easy. Every day was a careful balance between rent, food, and the small bills that never seemed to stop coming. She rarely spoke unless spoken to. Not because she was weak, but because she had learned that silence often caused less trouble. Some customers were kind, some were impatient, and some believed that money gave them the right to treat others badly. She treated them all the same. A calm voice, a short reply, quiet nod. That evening started like any other. The dinner rush had just begun. Plates clattered in the kitchen, and soft music played in the background. A few regular customers sat in their usual spots. The waitress moved from table to table, writing orders on a small notepad she kept in her pocket. Then the door opened, and the mood shifted. The man who walked in did not rush. He stepped inside slowly, looking around as if he owned the place. His clothes were expensive, clearly chosen to stand out. His shoes were polished, his watch heavy and shiny. He spoke loudly on his phone, laughing as if everyone should hear him. People turned their heads without meaning to. He chose a table near the center of the restaurant. Not because it was comfortable, but because it could be seen from everywhere. He sat back, crossed his arms, and continued his call for a few more moments before finally hanging up. The waitress noticed him right away. Not because of his wealth, but because she had learned to notice trouble early. Some people carried it with them without knowing. The way they looked at others. The way they expected to be served. She walked over with her usual calm expression and greeted him politely. Her voice was soft but clear. She asked if he was ready to order. He looked at her like she was part of the furniture. His eyes moved over her uniform, her worn shoes, her tired face. A small smile formed, not a kind one. "About time," he said. "I've been waiting." She hadn't been, but she didn't correct him. She took his order without comment. As she wrote, he made small remarks, mostly to himself, about the place, the food, and the service. None of it was loud enough to cause a scene, but loud enough to make his meaning clear. When she turned to leave, he added, "Make it quick. I don't have all night." She nodded once and walked away. From the kitchen, she watched him while waiting for the food to be prepared. He tapped his fingers on the table. He checked his watch again and again. When another waitress passed by, he waved his hand sharply, annoyed that it wasn't her coming toward him. When the food finally arrived, she placed the plate carefully in front of him. She asked if he needed anything else. He barely glanced at her. "Just don't mess it up," he said. She stepped back and returned to her work. As he ate, he seemed to enjoy being noticed. He laughed loudly at his own thoughts. He answered a call and spoke about money, deals, and places far away. Each word sounded like it was meant to remind everyone around him that he was important. Other customers noticed too. Some rolled their eyes. Some whispered. A few watched the waitress, expecting a reaction that never came. When he finished eating, he leaned back and looked around. He raised his hands slightly, snapping his fingers once. Not hard, but enough. She came over just as calmly as before. He asked for the bill. She placed it on the table and waited quietly. He looked at the amount and laughed. "That's it," he said. "I've spent more on coffee." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a handful of coins. Not bills. Coins. He weighed them in his hand for a moment, then let them fall onto the table with a sharp sound. A few rolled and dropped onto the floor. "There you go," he said. "Don't spend it all at once." The sound of the coins echoed louder than it should have. Conversations around them slowed. Someone at a nearby table stopped eating. The waitress looked down at the table, then at the floor. She didn't rush. She didn't react. She simply bent down and began to pick up the coins one by one. Her hands moved carefully, not because she was embarrassed, but because she didn't want to miss any. The man watched her with a satisfied expression. He leaned forward slightly, enjoying the moment. To him, this was harmless. A joke. A reminder of who stood above and who stood below. As she picked up the last coin, she stood up straight. She placed the coins neatly on the table. For a brief moment, she looked at him. Not with anger. Not with fear. Just steady eyes. Then she spoke. She said one name. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was calm, almost gentle. But the moment the name left her mouth, the man's smile froze. His eyes widened slightly. The color drained from his face. His hand, which had been resting casually on the table, tightened into a fist. Around them, no one understood what had just happened. The restaurant continued to hum with quiet noise, but something had clearly changed. The waitress did not explain. She did not raise her voice. She simply waited. And for the first time since he walked in, the rich man had nothing to say. The waitress remained calm, standing straight and looking directly at the man. The name she had spoken hung in the air like a small but powerful weight. She did not smile. She did not move closer. She did not raise her voice. She simply waited. The restaurant seemed normal on the surface, but beneath it, a quiet tension had settled, almost invisible to everyone else, yet undeniable to the two people at that table. The rich man's smile, which had been so confident just moments before, was gone. His eyes flicked quickly between the waitress and the coins on the table. He swallowed, almost unconsciously, and his fingers fidgeted. The posture he had held for years, the one that made him feel untouchable, suddenly felt uncomfortable. There was a small tremor in his hand as he reached out, almost without thinking, to touch the coins, as if they were proof of his control. But something had changed. He no longer felt control, he felt uncertainty. The waitress's calmness was intentional. She had faced many people in her life who believed that power came with wealth. Some shouted, some demanded, some tried to scare her. But she had learned that calmness carried a different kind of strength. It made people reveal themselves, often without realizing it. And this man, who had spent years thinking that wealth made him untouchable, was now revealing cracks he did not know existed. The other customers had noticed the silence between them. Some whispered softly to their companions, but no one dared interrupt. There was something in the air, an invisible thread connecting the two at that table, and everyone else was, unknowingly, on the edge of noticing it. Yet, the waitress continued as though nothing extraordinary was happening. Her hands rested loosely at her sides, her expression neutral, but her eyes remained focused. The rich man opened his mouth as if to speak, but no words came. He cleared his throat, tried to shift in his chair, tried to regain some of the arrogance that had defined him, but each effort seemed weaker than the last. The name she had spoken had power, not the kind of power that forced him to act immediately, but the kind that made him pause, reflect, and understand that someone in this room knew more than he assumed. He leaned back, trying to put some distance between them, but it didn't help. His pride had been challenged, quietly, and now it was his turn to process. His mind raced, recalling memories he had buried, decisions he had made, moments he had tried to forget. Each thought tugged at him in a way he had not expected. The waitress had done nothing aggressive. She had done nothing loud. Yet, by simply speaking a name, she had turned the situation completely around. The waitress did not speak again immediately. She did not need to. Silence can be louder than words. She watched him, letting him wrestle with his thoughts. She had learned that people often reveal more in their quiet moments than in their anger. His reactions were small. A tightening of the jaw, a narrowing of the eyes, a slight frown, but they spoke volumes. The man who had entered the restaurant with laughter and arrogance was now silent, almost cautious. For the first time that evening, he noticed something he had ignored all along. The presence of other people who could see the situation unfolding. Some were watching with curiosity, some with quiet amusement. None of them were intervening. None of them were laughing. There was no applause. It was just the stillness of a moment, and it felt heavier than any words could convey. The waitress's calm had become the focal point, and everyone else in the room unconsciously stepped back, giving space for the story unfolding in front of them. He shifted his weight, feeling uncomfortable. His mind tried to make sense of what had just happened. He had dealt with many people in his life, employees, colleagues, strangers, always expecting obedience or admiration. But this woman, who had served him quietly and politely, had done something different. She had spoken a truth that cut through the layers of wealth and arrogance. And now he could not figure out how to respond. The waitress finally spoke again, her voice soft but firm. She did not accuse, she did not scold. She simply asked if he needed anything else. The question was ordinary, almost mundane, but it reminded him that the conversation was still in his control if he chose to act. Yet he could not. His mind was tangled, trying to process the unexpected challenge she had presented. He realized, slowly, that she had achieved what few people could. She had unsettled him without raising her voice, without acting aggressively, and without betraying emotion. He tried to distract himself. He glanced around the restaurant, looking at other customers, at the walls, at the menu. But nothing drew his attention fully. His mind kept returning to the name she had said. It was a name from his past, a reminder of something he had hoped would never resurface. He could feel the heat of embarrassment rising, even as he tried to hide it behind a polite nod. He wanted to regain control, but the room seemed to conspire against him. Not with words, not with actions, but with quiet observation. The waitress's calm had become a mirror, reflecting his true self back at him. The coins on the table were still there, neatly arranged by the waitress. They no longer symbolized a joke or a challenge. Now they were evidence of a deeper story, a subtle confrontation that had already shifted the balance. He realized that the act of throwing them had been meaningless compared to what had just occurred, and he began to understand that this woman, who seemed ordinary to the outside world, possessed a quiet wisdom and strength that he could neither buy nor command. The waitress began to slowly move back toward her station. Her actions were deliberate, unhurried, and dignified. She did not rush, she did not hesitate, and she did not look back. Each step she took reinforced the lesson she had already spoken. Strength is not always loud, and respect is earned through actions, not money. The man's thoughts raced as he watched her leave. He realized that he had misjudged her completely. In his mind, she had been just a waitress, someone he could mock, someone beneath him. But now he could see the truth. He had been exposed, not by confrontation or anger, but by simple, quiet courage. It was a revelation that he had not anticipated, and it left him feeling strangely vulnerable. As the night continued, the restaurant carried on around them. Plates were cleared, orders were taken, and the music played softly in the background. Yet, for the rich man, nothing felt normal anymore. The calmness of the waitress had created a ripple that he could not ignore. He was forced to reflect, not only on the moment but on the way he had treated others throughout his life. For a man who had always relied on wealth to assert power, this was unfamiliar territory. He realized that the true measure of a person could not be seen in money, in possessions, or in outward appearances. It could be seen in how they carried themselves, how they treated others, and how they responded to challenges without losing their composure. The waitress had shown him all of this in one quiet act. By the end of the evening, he had not regained his confidence. He paid the remaining balance quietly and without comment. He stood, adjusted his expensive coat, and left the restaurant without another word. The moment he stepped outside, the weight of what had occurred seemed to follow him. He was no longer just a man with money. He was a man who had been reminded of humility, who had been challenged in a way that left a lasting impression. The waitress returned to her work, calm as ever. She wiped tables, refilled drinks, and smiled politely at the remaining customers. Nothing about her had changed on the surface, but inside, she carried a quiet satisfaction. She had faced someone who believed that wealth meant superiority and had reminded him of a truth he could not ignore. She had not raised her voice, she had not lost her composure, and she had remained human and dignified throughout. And so, life in the restaurant continued, with people coming and going, plates being served, and stories unfolding. Yet, for those who had witnessed the encounter, the lesson lingered. Strength does not always shout. Courage does not always roar. And sometimes, a single word, spoken at the right moment, can change everything. The morning after the incident, the waitress arrived at the restaurant as usual. The sun was rising slowly over the streets, and a soft glow came through the windows. She unlocked the door and took a deep breath, ready to start another day. Even though the previous evening had been unusual, she carried herself with the same calm, quiet demeanor that her regular customers and coworkers had come to know. Inside, the restaurant was still quiet. The smell of coffee and fresh bread filled the air, mixing with the faint scent of cleaning products. She started her routine, wiping down tables, setting out clean napkins, arranging silverware. Everything was orderly. Everything was in place. Her movements were deliberate, precise, and natural, the result of years of practice. She did not rush, and she did not pause unnecessarily. There was a rhythm to her work, a rhythm that allowed her to focus and remain composed, no matter what challenges the day might bring. As she worked, she thought about the rich man who had come the night before. His reaction had stayed with her, not because it was unusual for someone wealthy to act arrogantly, but because of the way his smile had faded at the sound of that one name. She had not meant to embarrass him or cause trouble. She had simply spoken a truth, a reminder that sometimes, the past catches up with people when they least expect it. And for the first time, she realized that even someone who seemed untouchable could be humanized with something as simple as words. The restaurant slowly began to fill with customers. Regulars came in, greeted her politely, and took their usual seats. She served them with the same attention and care as always. But a few new faces appeared, curious about the previous evening. Some whispered among themselves, exchanging glances when she walked by. There was a sense of anticipation, though no one knew exactly what to expect. The waitress noticed the glances but did not let them affect her work. Her focus remained on the tasks in front of her, on the orders she needed to take, and on the people she was helping. It was not long before the man returned. This time he entered quietly, without the usual laughter or loud phone calls. He looked around cautiously, almost as if he were trying to avoid drawing attention. When he saw her, his face betrayed a mix of emotions. Curiosity, hesitation, and something else he could not name. He approached the table in the center, the same one from the night before, and sat down slowly. The waitress greeted him as usual, politely asking what he would like to order. He hesitated, his hands resting on the table, then finally spoke. His voice was quieter than before, almost unsure. "Coffee," he said. "Black." She nodded and moved to prepare it, careful not to show any recognition of his unusual behavior. The kitchen was busy, and she worked efficiently, pouring the coffee, setting it on a tray, and walking back to his table without making a sound. When she placed the cup in front of him, she did so with the same calmness as before. There was no judgment in her eyes, no trace of triumph. Just a professional demeanor, quietly maintaining her dignity. He stared at the coffee for a moment, then looked up at her. There was a pause, filled with unspoken words. He wanted to say something, to explain or apologize, but the right words did not come. He was still processing the moment from the night before. The one name she had spoken had opened a door in his memory, and now he could not close it. He realized that he had underestimated the quiet power of someone who simply stayed true to herself. For the next few minutes, neither spoke. The restaurant moved around them as if in a different rhythm, the other customers unaware of the subtle tension at that table. The waitress continued to serve, refilling glasses and clearing plates from other tables. Each movement was precise, each action deliberate, showing that her strength was not in confrontation but in maintaining composure and focus. The rich man took a small sip of his coffee, and it seemed to give him a moment to gather his thoughts. He remembered things he had long tried to forget, moments when he had acted arrogantly, times when he had dismissed the worth of others, and decisions that had hurt people without him realizing. The name she had spoken was connected to all of these memories. It reminded him that life had a way of catching up with even the most confident and wealthy individuals. He finally spoke, his voice low and reflective. I didn't expect that, he said. I didn't expect anyone to know, or to care. The waitress nodded slightly, her expression neutral. She did not offer reassurance. She did not justify herself. She did not react emotionally. Her calmness forced him to confront his own thoughts. He realized that the power he had once relied upon, money, status, arrogance, was meaningless in the face of honesty, dignity, and quiet strength. He took another sip of his coffee, then looked out the window, as if searching for answers. The sunlight fell on his face, and for a brief moment, he appeared human, vulnerable in a way he had rarely allowed himself to be. He had always believed that control was derived from wealth, from appearances, from the ability to command attention. But the waitress had shown him something else entirely. That true strength came from within, from composure, and from treating others with respect. The waitress continued her work, serving the other tables, moving through the restaurant with practiced efficiency. Her presence was quiet but powerful. Every customer she interacted with, every plate she carried, and every word she spoke reinforced the idea that dignity and patience could create a force far greater than money or status. The rich man watched her, and with each passing moment, he understood more about what he had been missing in life. Hours passed, and the restaurant grew busy. Lunch hour brought a new wave of customers, and the waitress navigated the crowd effortlessly. The rich man remained at his table, drinking coffee slowly, reflecting on the encounter from the night before and the morning that followed. He did not try to speak with her again, not yet. He knew that the impact of her words and her calm presence was stronger if he remained silent and observed. As the day went on, he realized that the waitress had changed the way he viewed the world. Her composure had highlighted his flaws, his assumptions, and his misunderstandings. He had walked in expecting to dominate, to feel superior, and to assert his status. Instead, he found himself unsettled, challenged, and forced to confront truths about himself that he had long ignored. By the time the afternoon settled into a quiet rhythm, he had begun to understand the lesson she had imparted without words. Respect was earned, not demanded. Strength was shown, not declared. Power could not buy humility, and wealth could not replace character. And through it all, the waitress remained herself, calm, composed, and dignified. As he finally stood to leave, he left a generous tip, larger than the coins he had thrown the night before. It was not an attempt to buy favor or erase embarrassment. It was a silent acknowledgement of the lesson he had learned. He did not speak and she did not react. Their interaction had been enough. The understanding passed quietly between them. The waitress returned to her work, unaffected by the tip, unaffected by the man's presence or absence. She continued her day with the same focus and dignity, serving customers, clearing tables, and maintaining the rhythm that defined her work. And though the rich man was gone, the lesson lingered, not just for him but for everyone who had witnessed the subtle power of quiet strength. By evening, the restaurant settled down. The sun began to dip below the horizon, casting warm light through the windows. The waitress cleaned the tables, arranged the chairs, and prepared for another busy night. She thought about the day, not with pride or satisfaction, but with quiet reflection. She had faced someone who believed money and status could command respect, and she had shown, without anger or confrontation, that real strength comes from composure and dignity. The rich man's lesson was a reminder, not only to him but to anyone who witnessed it, that true respect cannot be bought, that power is measured by character, and that sometimes, the quietest person in the room holds the greatest strength. And for the waitress, life continued as it always had, calm, focused, and quietly extraordinary. The following day, the restaurant was quieter than usual. The waitress arrived early, as she always did, and started her morning routine. She unlocked the door, swept the floor, and arranged the tables. The smell of fresh coffee and baked bread filled the air, bringing a familiar sense of calm. Even though her life was filled with routine, she took pride in her work and the small ways she could make the day smooth for her customers. As the morning moved on, she noticed a familiar figure entering the restaurant. It was the man from the previous night and morning. But this time he was different. His steps were slower, more hesitant. His posture was not as confident, and his eyes carried a weight that had not been there before. He looked around quietly, noticing the space and the other customers, but his focus remained on the waitress. He walked toward his usual table without the usual bravado. There was no laughter, no phone call, no display of wealth. Just a quiet, cautious presence. The waitress greeted him politely and asked if he wanted his usual. He nodded and ordered a simple breakfast. She moved to prepare it, carefully placing each item on a tray. Her hands moved with the same calm efficiency as always. The kitchen was busy, but she never rushed. She moved with purpose, yet quietly, giving a sense of dignity to every action. When she placed the breakfast in front of him, he looked at her with a mixture of curiosity and uncertainty. He could see that she had noticed the change in his demeanor, but she did not comment. Her silence was intentional. She had learned that some lessons are taught more powerfully without words. By remaining calm, composed, and dignified, she allowed him to confront his own thoughts and feelings. He picked up his fork and began to eat slowly, not because he was hungry, but because he needed time to think. He remembered the name she had spoken. It was connected to a moment in his past that he had buried deep, a moment he had long tried to forget. The memory was not pleasant, but it was important. It reminded him that actions have consequences, and that treating people without respect can leave lasting impressions. The waitress continued her work, serving other customers, refilling drinks, and clearing tables. She moved through the restaurant with a quiet confidence, each step measured and calm. The rich man watched her, slowly realizing that her strength did not come from wealth, appearance, or status. Her strength came from within, from her composure, her dignity, and her ability to remain true to herself in the face of arrogance. He began to reflect on his life. He thought about the decisions he had made, the people he had treated poorly, and the moments he had ignored that had shaped who he was. The name she had spoken had opened a door he could not close. It forced him to confront himself, to see the person he had been and the person he wanted to become. For the first time, he felt a sense of humility that he had never experienced before. As he sat there, he realized that the act of throwing coins the night before had been foolish. It had been an attempt to assert superiority, but it had revealed his vulnerability instead. The waitress had not reacted with anger, embarrassment, or fear. She had simply remained composed, showing him a lesson in humility and strength that money could never buy. Other customers noticed the quiet tension at his table, though they did not understand it. Some whispered softly, exchanging glances as they observed the interaction. The waitress, however, did not acknowledge their attention. She continued her work as if nothing extraordinary were happening, but the rich man could feel the weight of her presence. It was not the presence of wealth or power, but the presence of someone grounded, strong, and unshakable. He thought about the past, recalling moments when he had treated people poorly, thinking that money and status were all that mattered. He remembered times when he had dismissed advice, ignored kindness, and acted arrogantly. The name she had spoken was tied to those memories, a reminder that life had a way of balancing itself. He realized that he had underestimated people, judging them by appearances rather than character. The waitress moved to his table again, not to lecture or admonish, but to ask if he needed anything else. Her voice was calm, steady, and unhurried. She did not raise her tone or show emotion, but her presence alone carried a message. Respect and strength do not need to be demanded. They are shown through composure, honesty, and dignity. He hesitated before answering. He wanted to speak, to apologize or to explain, but the right words would not come. Instead, he nodded and asked for a glass of water. As she poured it, he watched her movements, noticing the care and attention she put into even the smallest tasks. It struck him that her strength was not loud or aggressive, but quiet and consistent. It was the kind of strength that could withstand arrogance and still remain unshaken. The morning passed slowly, and the restaurant grew busier. The waitress moved among the tables with her usual efficiency, serving each customer with care. The rich man remained at his table, reflecting on the lessons he had learned. He realized that humility was not weakness, that dignity was not pride, and that respect was earned, not bought. The quiet power of the waitress had shown him truths he could not ignore. By the time he finished his breakfast, he had made a decision. He would not attempt to assert dominance or display arrogance again. He would carry the lesson he had learned from the waitress with him. Her composure, her strength, and her dignity had left a lasting impression. She had shown him that true power comes from character, not money, and that respect is something to be given, not taken. As he stood to leave, he left a note on the table. It was short, simple, and heartfelt. It thanked her for reminding him of the importance of humility and strength. He did not speak, did not seek acknowledgement, and did not try to explain further. The gesture alone conveyed more than words could. The waitress continued her work, collecting the note and placing it safely aside. She did not show excitement or pride. Her work remained her focus, and her composure remained intact. She had done what she always did, faced challenges with quiet strength, treated others with dignity, and maintained her own sense of self-worth. As the rich man left the restaurant, he felt a weight lifted from his shoulders. He had come expecting to assert power, but he had left carrying a lesson in humility and human strength. The memory of the waitress's calm, composed demeanor, and the impact of her words would stay with him for a long time. The day continued, with customers coming and going, plates being served, and conversations taking place. The restaurant returned to its normal rhythm, but the lesson lingered, subtle yet powerful. The quiet strength of one person had reminded another of the importance of humility, dignity, and respect. For the waitress, life continued as it always had. She carried on with her routine, serving customers, cleaning tables, and maintaining the rhythm that gave her life meaning. She had not changed her behavior, but the impact she had made was undeniable. She had faced arrogance with composure, had reminded someone of their humanity, and had done so without raising her voice or losing her dignity. And for the rich man, the lesson was unforgettable. The simple act of being observed, understood, and challenged by quiet strength had shifted his perspective. He would carry it forward in his life, a reminder that true respect, power, and strength are found not in wealth or status, but in character, humility, and the courage to remain calm in the face of arrogance. The evening settled into a calm rhythm at the restaurant. The soft glow of the lights reflected off the polished surfaces, and the faint sound of quiet conversation mixed with the clinking of plates and glasses. The waitress moved through the space with her usual grace, carrying plates, clearing tables, and offering polite smiles to the customers. There was nothing about her appearance or actions that suggested she had been at the center of a lesson in humility for a man wealthy enough to think he could command the world. The rich man had not returned that afternoon, but the memory of the waitress's calm strength lingered in his mind. He thought about her as he walked through his own life, realizing that her quiet composure had revealed a truth he could not ignore. It was not about the coins or the tip, the table or the restaurant. It was about the lesson she had silently taught, that respect cannot be bought, and that dignity is more powerful than arrogance. That night, the restaurant began to fill with the dinner crowd. Families, couples, and friends came in, talking softly and enjoying the warmth of the place. The waitress moved efficiently among the tables, taking orders, refilling glasses, and clearing dishes. Each action was deliberate and composed, showing that her strength was consistent, grounded in years of experience and personal integrity. A few new customers noticed her, curious about the calm presence she carried. Some whispered quietly to their companions, wondering why she seemed different, almost extraordinary. They could not explain it. She did not perform or show off, yet there was something compelling in the way she moved, spoke, and handled the demands of the restaurant with ease. It was clear she had mastered the art of balance, maintaining her dignity while serving others and managing challenges without complaint. Later in the evening, the door opened again. It was the rich man. He entered quietly, his usual arrogance replaced with a softer, more reflective presence. He scanned the room, seeing the activity, the customers, and finally the waitress. When their eyes met, there was a silent understanding between them. He did not approach immediately. He took a moment to gather his thoughts, recognizing that the lesson he had learned from her composure was ongoing and required reflection. He finally walked toward his usual table and sat down. The waitress approached, greeting him politely and asking what he would like. He asked for something simple, almost hesitant, and she nodded, moving to fulfill his order. As she worked, he watched her, noticing every small action. The care in her movements, the calm efficiency, the unwavering composure. He realized that her strength was not in confrontation but in remaining steady, consistent, and dignified. He had underestimated the power of quiet confidence. The waitress placed his meal in front of him without a word beyond the polite question of whether he needed anything else. He stared at the plate, then looked up at her. He wanted to speak but found that words were insufficient to convey the gratitude and understanding he felt. The memory of the coins, the name she had spoken, and the quiet strength she had shown came together, forming a lesson he could not ignore. It was a reminder that humility and dignity are qualities that cannot be bought, and that true respect comes from actions, not status. The other customers moved about the restaurant, unaware of the silent exchange taking place. Yet the rich man could feel the impact of her presence. He had always believed that wealth could command respect, that status could assert power, and that arrogance could hide vulnerability. But the waitress had shown him differently. By remaining composed, calm, and dignified, she had revealed truths about character, humility, and strength that money could never purchase. He thought about his own life, his decisions, his treatment of others, and the way he had acted when he believed his wealth gave him superiority. He realized that he had been blind to the value of quiet strength, of patience, and of composure. The waitress had become a mirror, reflecting the gaps in his understanding and highlighting the lessons he had missed over the years. Hours passed, and the restaurant continued to bustle. The waitress moved gracefully from table to table, maintaining her rhythm, her efficiency, and her calm presence. The rich man sat quietly, observing and reflecting, recognizing that this was a rare opportunity to understand the deeper truths of human behavior and interaction. He did not interrupt her, did not seek attention, and did not attempt to assert control. He simply observed and absorbed the lesson she had imparted silently. Finally, as the evening wound down, he stood to leave. He left a note on the table expressing his appreciation, though he did not expect acknowledgement. It was a simple gesture, yet profound. The waitress saw it, folded it carefully, and placed it in her apron. She continued her work without fanfare, maintaining the calm and composed presence that had taught him the most important lesson of all. The rich man left the restaurant with a sense of quiet reflection. He understood that the encounter had changed him, not because of words or confrontation, but because of the example of quiet strength, dignity, and composure. He realized that true respect is earned through character, humility, and the way one treats others, not through money or status. The waitress continued her night, serving customers with the same focus and care she had always shown. Her actions remained steady and deliberate, a living example of the values she embodied. The restaurant carried on as usual, but the lesson lingered, subtle, powerful, and enduring. By the time she closed the restaurant, cleaned the tables, and prepared for the next day, she reflected briefly on the events that had unfolded. She did not feel pride or triumph. Her focus remained on her work, her responsibilities, and the quiet impact she had made. She had faced someone who believed wealth and status could command respect, and she had reminded him of the power of humility and strength without raising her voice or losing her dignity. The night ended quietly. The lights were dimmed, the tables were set for the next day, and the restaurant was still. The waitress locked the door and stepped outside, feeling the cool evening air on her face. The world outside continued as it always had, but the lessons of the day had left a lasting impression on one man and, quietly, on everyone who had witnessed her presence. Her life would continue as usual, filled with hard work, small joys, and daily challenges. Yet she had made a difference. Not through wealth, not through power, not through loud words, but through composure, dignity, and the quiet strength of remaining true to herself. And the man who had once thrown coins at her would carry her lesson forever. A reminder that humility, respect, and character are the true measures of a person. The story of that evening, the quiet lesson, and the demonstration of real human strength would linger in the memories of those who saw it. It would serve as a reminder that even in a simple restaurant, in the daily interactions of ordinary life, profound lessons can be taught, understood, and carried forward. And through it all, the waitress remained herself, calm, composed, and quietly extraordinary.